The summer was coming to an end. The Jewish year was nearly over. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the last day that occurs the year, the whole camp was electric with the tension which was all in our hearts. In despite of everything, this day was different from any other. The last day of the year, the word last, ranged very strangely. What if it were indeed the last day? They gave us our evening meal, a very quick, thick soup, but no one touched it. We wanted to wait until after prayers. At the place of assembly surrounded by the electric barbed wire, thousands of silent Jews gathered, their faces stricken. Night was falling. Other prisoners continued to crowd in from every block, able suddenly to conquer time and space and submit both to their will. What are you, my God? I thought angrily, compared to this afflicted crowd proclaiming to you their faith, their anger, their revolt. What does your greatness mean, Lord of the universe? In the face of all this weakness, this decomposition, and this decay, why do you still trouble their sick minds, their crippled bodies? 10,000 men had come to attend the solemn service, heads of the blocks, chapels, functionaries of death. Bless the Eternal. The voice of the officiant had just made itself heard. I thought at first it was the wind. Blessed be the name of the Eternal. Thousands of voices repeated the benediction. Thousands of men precipitated themselves like trees before a tempest. Blessed be the name of the Eternal. Why, but why should I bless him? In every fiber I rebelled, because he had had thousands of children burned in his pits, because he kept 6 crematories working night and day on Sundays and feast days, because his great might he had created Auschwitz, Birkenau, Buna, and so many factories of death. How could I say to him, blessed art thou, eternal master of the universe, who chose us among the races to be tortured day and night, to see our fathers, our mothers, our brothers in the crematoria, paradise. Praise be thy holy name, thou who wast chosen us to be butchered on thin altar, thine altar. I heard the voice of the officiant rising up, powerful yet the same time broken, amid the tears, the sobs, the sighs of the whole congregation. All the earth of the universe are God's. He kept stopping every moment as though he did not have the strength to find the meaning beneath the words. The melody choked in his throat, and I, mystic that I had been, I thought, yes, man is very strong, greater than God. When you were deceived by Adam and Eve, you drove them out of paradise. When Noah's generation displeased you, you brought down the flood. When Sodom no longer fell favor in your eyes, you made the sky rain down fire and sulfur. But these men here, whom you have betrayed, whom you have allowed to be tortured, butchered, gassed, and burned, what do? They pray before you. You praise. They praise your name. All creation bears witness the greatness of God. Once New Year's Day had dominated my life, I knew that my sins grieved the Eternal. I implored his forgiveness. Once I had believed profound that upon one solitary deed of mine, one solitary prayer, depended the salvation of the world. This day I ceased to plead. I was no longer capable of lamentation. On the contrary, I felt very strong. I was the accuser, God the accused. My eyes were open and I was alone, terribly alone in a world without God and without man, without love or mercy. I had ceased to be anything but ashes. Yet I felt myself to be stronger than the Almighty, to whom my life I had been tried for so long. I stood amid the praying congregation, observing it like a stranger. The service ended with the Kaddish. Everyone recited the Kaddish over his parents, over his children, over his brother, and over himself. We stayed for a long time at the assembly place. No one dared to drag himself away from this mirage. Then it was time to go to bed, and slowly the prisoners made their way to their blocks. I heard people wishing one another Happy New Year. I ran off to look for my father, and I had the same and at the same time I was afraid of having to wish him a Happy New Year when I no longer believed in it. He was standing near the wall, bowed down, his shoulders sagging as though beneath a heavy burden. I went up to him, took his hand, and kissed it. A tear fell upon it. Who was that tear? Mine? His? I said nothing, nor did he. We had never understood one another so clearly. The sound of the bell jolted us back to reality. We must go to bed. We came back from far away. I raised my eyes to look at my father's face, leaning over mine, to try to discover a smile or something resembling upon the dried up countenance. Nothing, the shadow of an expression beacon. Yom Kippur, the day of Atonement. Should we fast? The question was hotly debated. To fast would mean serve, swift, or death. We fasted here the whole year round. The whole year was Yom Kippur, but others said that we should fast simply because it was dangerous to do so. We should show God that even here, in this enclosed hell, we were capable of singing His praises. I did not fast, mainly to please my father, who had forbidden me to do so. But further, there was no longer any reason why I should fast. I no longer accepted God's silence. As I swallowed my bowl of soup, I saw the jester and act of rebellion and protest against him, and I nibbled my crust of bread. In the depths of my heart, I felt a great void. The SS gave us 5 New Year gifts. We had just come back from work. As soon as we had passed through the door of the camp, we sensed something different in the air. Roll call did not take so long than usual. The evening soup was given out of great speed and swallowed down at once in anguish. I was no longer the same block as my father. I had been transferred to another unit. The building one worked 12 hours a day and had to drag heavy blocks of stone about. The head of the new block was a German Jew, small of stature with piercing eyes. He told us that evening that he told us that evening that no one would be allowed to go after that evening soup. And soon a terrible word was circulating section. We knew what that meant. An SS man would examine us. Whenever he found a weak one, a Mussulman, as we called them, he would write his number down. Good for the crematorium. After soup, we gathered together between the beds. The veteran said, "You're lucky to have been brought here so late. The camp is paradise today compared to what it was like 2 years ago." Buna was a real hell then. There was no longer no blankets. There was no water, no blankets, less soup and bread. At night we slept almost naked, and it was below 30 degrees. The corpses were collocated in hundreds every day. The work was hard. Today, this was a little paradise. The capital had orders to kill a certain number of prisoners every day. And every week, selection, merciless selection. You're so lucky. Stop it. Be quiet, I beg. You can tell your stories tomorrow or some other day. They burst out laughing. They were no veterans for nothing. Are you scared? So were we scared, and there was plenty to be scared of in those days. The old men stayed in the corner, dumb, motionless, hunted. Some were praying, and hours delayed. In an hour we should know the verdict, death or reprise. And my father, suddenly I remember him. How would he pass the selection? He had aged so much. The head of our block had never been outside the concentration camp since 1933. He had already been through all the slaughterhouses, all the factories of death. At about 9 o'clock, he took up his position into the mist. Achtin, there was instant silence. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say. For the first time, I heard his voice quiver. In a few moments, the selection will begin. You must get completely undressed. Then, one by one, you will go to the SS doctors. I hope you will be all succeed in getting through, but you must help your own chances. Before you go into the next room, move about in some way that you give yourselves a little color. Don't walk slow, run. Run as if the devil were after you. Don't look at the SS. Run straight in front of you. He broke off for a moment, then added, and the essential thing is don't be afraid. Here was a piece of advice we should all have liked very much to be able to follow. I got undressed, leaving my clothes in the bed. There was no danger of anyone stealing them this evening. TB and Yusi had changed their unit the same time as I and came up to me and said, "Let's keep together. We shall be stronger." Yossi was murmuring something between his teeth. He must have been praying. I had never realized that Yossi was a believer. I had always thought the reverse. Tubi was silent, very pale. All the prisoners in the block stood naked between the beds. This must be how one stands at the last judgment. They're coming. There were three SS officers standing around the notorious Mr. Mingle, who had received us at Birkenau. The head of the block was an attempt at had an attempt at smile at us. Ready? Yes, we were ready. So were the SS doctor. Mr. Mingle was holding a list in his hand. Our numbers. He had a sign at the head of the block. We can begin, as if this were a game. The first to go by were the officials the, of the block, substitute, capos, foremen, all in perfect condition, of course. Then came the ordinary prisoner's turn. Mr. Mingle took stock of them from head to toe. Every now and then he wrote the number down. One single thought filled my mind. Do not let my number be taken, not to show my left arm. There were only Tobai, Yusi, and me in front of me. They passed. I had time to notice that Mingle had not written their numbers down. Someone pushed me. It was my turn. I ran without looking back. My head was spinning. You're too thin. You're too weak. You're too thin. You're good for furnace. The race seemed terrible. I thought I had been running for years. You're too thin. You're too weak. At last I had arrived, exhausted. When I regained my breath, I questioned Yossi and TV. Was I written down? No, said Yossi, he added, smiling. In any case, he couldn't have written you down. You were running too fast. I began to laugh. I was glad. I would have liked to have kissed him. At the moment, what did the others matter? I hadn't been written down. Those numbers had not been stood upon, abandoned by the whole world. Some were weeping in silence. The SS officer went away. The head of the block appeared, his face reflecting the general weariness. Everything went off all right. Don't worry, nothing is going to happen to anyone. To anyone. Again he tried to smile. A poor emaciated drilled Jew questioned him vividly in a trembling voice. But the block state they did write me down. The head of the block let his anger break out. What? Did someone refuse to believe him? What's the matter now? Am I telling lies to them? I tell you once for all, nothing is going to happen to you, to anyone. You're all wallowing in your own despair, you fool. The bell rang, a signal that the selection had been completed through the camp. With all my might, I began to run to block 36. One, to meet my father. He came up to me and said, "Well, so you passed." "Yes, me too." How we breathed again. Now my father had brought me a present, half a ration of bread, and obtained in exchange for a piece of rubber I found at the warehouse, which would use for his shoe. The bell. We already must separate and go to bed. Everything was regulated by the bell. It gave me orders. I automatically obeyed it. I hated it whenever I dreamed of a better world. I could only imagine the universe without any bells. Several days had elapsed. We no longer thought about the selection. We went to work as usual, loading heavy stones into railway wagons. Rations had become more meager. This was only change. We had risen before dawn, as on every day. We had received the black coffee, the ration of bread. We were about to set out to the yard as usual. The head of the block arrived running. Silence for a moment. I have a list of numbers here. I'm going to read them to you. Those whose numbers I call won't be going to work this morning. They'll stay behind in the camp. And in a soft voice, he read about 10 numbers. We had understood these numbers were chosen at the selection. Dr. Miro had not forgotten. The head of the block went down to his room. 10 prisoners surrounded him, hanging onto his clothes. Save us, you promised. We went to the yard. We're strong enough to go to work. We're good workers. We can. We will. He tried to calm them, to reassure them that of their faith, to explain them that the fact that they were staying behind in the camp did not mean that there was no tragic significance. After all, I stayed here myself every day, he added. It was somewhat feeble argument. He realized it, and without another word, he went on to shut himself up in his room. The bell had just rung. Form up. It scarcely mattered now that the work was done, was hard. The essential thing was to be far as possible from the block, from the crucible of death, from the center of hell. I saw my father running toward me. I became frightened. All of a sudden, what's the matter? Out of breath, he could hardly open his mouth. Me too, me too. They told me to stay behind in the camp. They had written down my number without his being aware of it. What will happen? I asked in English. But it was he who tried to reassure me. It wasn't certain yet. There's still a chance of escape. They're going to do another selection today. The decisive selection. I was silent. He felt that his name was short, that his time was short. He spoke quickly. He would have liked to say so many things. His speech grew confused, his voice choked. He knew that I would have to go in a few moments. He would have to stay behind alone, so very alone. Look, take this knife, he said. I don't need it any longer. It might be useful to you. And I take this pound of spoon as well. Don't sell them quickly. Go on, take what I'm giving you. The inheritance. Don't talk like that, father. I felt that I would break into sobs. I don't want you to say that. Keep the spoon and the knife. You need them as much as I do. We shall see each other again this evening after work. He took me with his bright eyes, bowed with despair. He went on, I am asking this of you. Take them, do as I ask, my son. We have no time. Do as your father asked. Our couple yelled that we should start. The unit said toward the camp, left, right. I bite my lips. My father had stayed by the block, leaning against the wall. Then he had begun to run, to catch up with us. Perhaps he had forgotten something that he wanted to say. But we were marching so quickly, left, right. We were already at the gate. They counted us to the din of the military music. We were outside. The whole day I wandered about as if I sleeping walking. Now and then TB and UC would throw me in my brotherly ward. The capo too tried to reassure me. He had given me easier work today. I felt sick at heart. How well were they treating me? Like an orphan, I thought. Even now, my father is still helping me. I did not know myself what I wanted. for that day to pass quickly or not. I was afraid of finding myself alone that night. How would it how good would it be to die here? At last we began to return journey. How I longed for the orders to run, the military march, the gate, the camp. I ran to block 36, where there are still miracles on his death, on this earth. He was alive. He had escaped the second selection. He had been able to prove that he was still useful. I gave him back the knife and the spoon. Ariga Drummer left us a victim of the selection. Lately he had wandered among us, his eyes glazed, telling everyone his weakness. I can't go on. It's all over. It is impossible to raise his morale. He didn't listen to what we told him. He could only repeat that all was over for him, that he could no longer keep up the struggle, that he had no strength left, nor faith. Suddenly, his eyes would become blank. Nothing but two open wounds, two pits of terror.
Not the only one to lose his faith during those election days. I knew a rabbi from a little town in Holland, a bent old man whose lips were always trembling. He used to pray all the time, in the block, in the yard, in the ranks. He would recite whole passages from the Talmud from memory, argued with himself, asked himself questions, and answered himself. And one day he said to me, "It's the end. God is no longer with me." And, as though he had repented of having spoken such words, so clipped, so cold, he added in his faint voice, "I know. One has no right to say things like that. I know. Man, it's too small. Man is too small, too humble, and inconsiderable to seek to understand the mysterious ways of God. But what can I do? I am not a sage, one of the elect, nor a saint. I'm just an ordinary creature of flesh and blood. I've got eyes, too, and I can see what they're doing here. Where's the divine mercy? Where is God? How can I believe? How could anyone believe in this merciful God? Poor Akiba, drummer, if he could have gone on believing in God, if he could have seen a proof of God in his Calvary, he would not have been taken by the selection. But as soon as he felt the first cracks forming in his faith, he had lost his reason for struggling and had begun to die. When the selection came, he was condemned in advance, offering his own neck to the executioner. All he asked of us was, "In 3 days I shall no longer be here. Say the Kaddish for me." We promised him. In 3 days, when we saw the smoke rising from the chimney, we would think of him. 10 of us would gather together and hold a special service. All his friends would say the Kaddish. Then he went off toward the hospital, his steps neither nor looking back. An ambulance was waiting to take him to Birkenau. These were terrible days. We received more blows than food. We were crushed with work, and 3 days after he had gone, we forgot to say the Kaddish. Winter, winter had come. The days were short. The nights had become almost unbearable. The first hours of dawn, the icy wind cut like a whip. We were given winter clothes, slightly thicker striped shirts, the veterans found in the new source of desertion. Now you'll be getting a taste of the camp. We left for work as usual, our bodies frozen. The stones were so cold that it seemed as though our hands would be glued to them if we would touch them. But you get used to anything. On Christmas and New Year's Day, there was no work. We were allowed a slightly thicker suit. Toward the middle of January, my foot began to swell because of the cold. I was unable to put it on the ground. I went to have it get examined. The doctor, a great Jewish doctor, a prisoner like ourselves, was quite definite. I must have the operation. if we waited, your toes and perhaps a whole leg would have to be amputated. This was the last straw, but I had no choice. The doctor had decided on an operation and there was no discussing. I was even glad that it was he who had made the decision. They put me into a bed with white sheets. I had forgotten that people slept with sheets. The hospital was not bad at all. We were given good bread and thicker soup. No more bell, no more roll call, no more work. Now and then I was able to send a bit of bread to my father. Near me lay a Hungarian Jew who had been struck down with uh, dysentery, skin, a bone, with dead eyes. I could only hear his voice. It was the sole indication that he was alive. Where did he get the strength to talk? You mustn't rejoice too soon, my boy. There's a selection here too, more often than outside. Germany doesn't need sick Jews. Germany doesn't need me. When the next transports come, you'll have a new neighbor. So listen to me and take my advice. Get out, get out of the hospital before the next selection. These words, which came from underground, from the forceless, faceless shape, filled with me in terror. It was indeed true that the hospital was very small, and that if new individuals arrived in the next few days, the room would have to be found for them. But perhaps my faceless neighbor, fearing that he would be among the first victims, simply wanted to drag me away to free my bed in order to give himself a chance to survive. Perhaps he just wanted to frighten me. Yet, what if he were telling the truth? I decided to wait events. The doctor came to tell me that the operation would be the next day. Don't be afraid, he added. Everything will be all right. At 10 o'clock in the morning, they took me into the operating room. My doctor was there. I took comfort from this. I felt nothing serious could happen while he was there. There was a balm in every word he spoke, and every glance he gave me a message of hope. It will hurt you a bit, he said, but that will pass. Grit your teeth. The operation lasted an hour. They had not put me to sleep. I kept my eyes fixed open upon my doctor. Then I felt myself go under. When I came around, opening my eyes, I could see nothing at first, but with greatness my sheets. Then I noticed the face of the doctor, bending me over. Everything went off well. You're brave, my boy. Now you're going to stay here for 2 weeks. Rest comfortably, and it'll be over. You'll eat well and relax your body and your nerves. I could only follow the movements of his lips. I scarcely understood what he was saying, but the murmur of his voice did me good. Suddenly, a cold sweat broke out of my forehead. I could not feel my leg. What, have they amputated it? Doctor, I screamed. Doctor, what's the matter, son? I lacked the courage to ask him the question. Doctor, I'm thirsty. He had brought me water. He was smiling. He was getting ready to visit other patients. Doctor, what? Shall I be able to use my leg? He was no longer smiling. I was very frightened. He said, do you trust me, my boy? I trust you absolutely, doctor. Well, then listen to me. You'll completely recover in a fortnight. You'll be able to walk like anyone else. The sole of your foot was all full of pus. We had just opened up the swelling. You haven't had your leg amputated, you'll see. In a fortnight, it's time you'll be walking like everyone else. I had only a fortnight to wait. 2 days after my operation, there was a rumor going around the camp that the front had suddenly drawn near. The Red Army, they said, was advancing on Buno. It was only a matter of hours now. We were already accustomed to rumors of this kind. It was not the first time a false prophet had foretold us peace on earth, negotiations with the Red Cross for our release, or other false rumors. And often we believed him. It was an injection of morphine. But this time, these prophecies seemed more solid. During these last few nights, we had heard the guns in the distance. My neighbor, the fearless one, said, "Don't let yourself be fooled with illusion. Hitler has made it very clear that he will annihilate all Jews before the clock strikes 12, before they can hear the last stroke." I burst out. "What does it matter to you? Do we have to regard Hitler was a prophet?" His glazed, faded eyes looked at me. At last he said in a weary voice, "I've got more faith in Hitler than anyone else. He's the only one who has kept his promise, all his promises, to the Jewish people." At 4 o'clock of the afternoon of the same day, as usual, the bell summoned all the heads of the blocks to go and report. They came back, shattered. They could only just open their lips enough to say the word evacuation. The camp was to be emptied and we were to be sent further back. Where to? Somewhere right in the depths of Germany, to the other camps. There was no shortage of time. When? Tomorrow evening. Perhaps the Russians will arrive first. Perhaps. We knew perfectly well that they would not. The camp had become a hive. People ran about, shouting at one another, and all the blocks, perhaps. Preparations for the journey were going on. I had forgotten about my bare foot. A doctor came into the room and announced, "Tomorrow, immediately after nightfall, the camp will be set out. Block after block, patients will stay in the infirmary. They will not be evacuated." This news made us think, were the SS going to have hundreds of prisoners to strut about the hospital blocks waiting for their liberators? Were they going to let the Jews hear the 12th stroke around? Obviously not. All the individuals will be similarly killed, and the faceless ones, and sent to the crematory in a final batch. "The camp is certain to be mine," another said. "The moment of the evacuation's over it. It'll blow up." As for me, I was not thinking about death, but I did not want to be separated from my father. We had already suffered so much, borne so much together. This was not the time to be separated. I ran outside to look for him. The snow was thick, and the windows of the blocks were veiled with frost. One shoe in my hand, because I could not go onto my right foot. I ran on, feeling neither pain nor cold. "What shall we do?" My father did not answer. "What shall we do, father?" He was lost in thought. The choice was in our hands. For once we could decide our fate for ourselves. We could both stay in the hospital, where I could, thanks to my doctor, get him entered as a patient or a nurse. Or else we could follow the others. We Well, what shall we do, father? He was silent. "Let's be evacuated with the others," I said to him. He did not answer. He looked at my foot. "Do you think you can walk?" "Yes, I think so." "Let's hope that we shan't hit Eliezer." I learned after the war the fate of those who had stayed behind in the hospital. They were quick. They were quite simply liberated by the Russians 2 days after the evacuation. I did not go back to the hospital again. I returned to my block. My wound was open and bleeding. The snow had gone red where I had trodden. The head of the block gave out double rate rations of bread and margarine for the journey. We could take as many shirts and other clothes as we liked from the store. It was cold. We got into bed. The last night in Buna, yet another last night. The last night at home, the last night in the ghetto, the last night in the train, and now the last night in Buna. How much longer of our lives to be dragged out from the last night to another? I could not sleep at all. Through the frosted plains, bursts of red light could be seen. Cannon shots split the night's silence. How close the Russians were between them and us. What night, our last night, There was whispering from the bed to another. With luck, the Russians would be here before the evacuation. Hope revived again. Someone shouted, "Try it and sleep. Gather your strength for the journey." This reminder reminded me of my mother's last words of advice in the ghetto, but I could not sleep. My foot felt as if it were burning. In the morning, the face of the camp had changed. Prisoners appeared in strange outfits. It was like a masquerade. Everyone had put on several garments on top of another in order to keep out of the cold, or mountebanks, wider than they were tall, more dead than alive. Poor clowns, their ghost-like faces emerging from piles of prison clothes. Buffoons. I tried to find a shoe that was too large. In vain. I tore up a blanket and wrapped it around the foot in it. Then I went wandering through the camp, looking for a little more bread and a few potatoes. Some said we were going to be taken to Czechoslovakia. No, not to Gross Rosa. No, to Plateswood. No, to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The snow was still coming down thickly. The time was passing quickly. Dusk had fallen. The day was disappearing in a monochrome of gray. The head of the block suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to clean out the block. He ordered 4 prisoners to wash the wooden floor, and about an hour before leaving the camp. Why? For whom? For the Libertarian Army, he cried, so that they'll realize there were men living here, not pigs. Where were the men? The block was clean from top to bottom, washed in every corner. At 6 o'clock the bell rang. The death knell, the burial, the procession was about to begin its march. Form quickly. In a few moments we were all in rows by blocks. Night had fallen. Everything was in order, according to the arranged plan. The searchlights came on. Hundreds of armed SS men rose up of the darkness, accompanied by sheepdogs. The snow never ceased. The gates of the camp opened. It seemed that there were even darker night that was waiting for us on the other side. The first blocks began to march. We waited. We had to wait for the departure of the 56 blocks who came before us. It was very cold. In my pocket I had 2 pieces of bread. With how much pleasure could I have eaten them? But I was not allowed to, not yet. Our turn was coming. Block 55, Block 53, Block 55, Block 57. Forward, march. It snowed relentlessly.